are you doing? Let's see. Good afternoon. I hope you're all fine. I will get to it so that we don't waste too much time. As you know, today's presentation is about critical thinking in education. And my main idea is that it should be a collective endeavor. It's part of a collective culture rather than just one individual thinking critically. These are the topics, 3, 6, 7, and we'll start with critical thinking. Critical thinking, as you know, it has become almost an undisputed goal. In science institutions, they are saying that critical thinking is supported by many science institutions, and they want their students to be critical thinkers. When we go to the world of business, we see the same thing. They want students to be critical before they join the workforce, so that then they are critical employees. But the question is, do our societies really want students to be critical? Because this is kind of like one of those fashions or fads that come and everybody uses the word, but do we really want students to be critical? So, for example, if you want to look at China, for example, they're very happy with people being critical, as it were, and creative, and having companies like QIA, but they are not so happy with students being critical in Hong Kong, for example. So some microphone is making a lot of noise. Let me see. Yes, that's one. So the question that we have to ask ourselves, and our ministries and so forth, do we really want students to be critical? And sometimes we just have to look at our own rules and regulations, and we will see that, for example, if we look at the bylaws, our own bylaws, students cannot distribute anything on campus without permission from the college. So how can they be critical if they need permission to be critical? So this is just a question at the start. What is critical thinking? What is critical thinking not really? What is it not? Of course, it's not nagging. Nobody wants us to make people professional naggers, naysayers, hypercritical people, or that are really contrary. That's not the point. When we say that we want students, we want ourselves to be critical, we are not talking about nagging. That's another game. And if you look at these 3 pictures, you will see the first one is almost, let me move this, it's almost impossible. How about a nice cup of big cup of critical thinking, and we get a soldier? Whereas a soldier is not really a model of a critical thinker, because soldiers have to follow orders without critiquing everything that is said to them. So, as I try to illustrate here, there are different things that sometimes we mix up. One thing is to be critical, something else is to be a problem solver, something else is to be creative. Of course, we cannot solve problems without being creative, and we will not see problems unless we are critical. They are connected, but they're not the same. So sometimes when people say, yeah, we want students to be critical, what they really mean is we want students to solve problems. But kind of like, we will control the problems and they should produce the solution. And in a lot of cases, this has to do with the economy. They just want students who will help the country develop things, be innovative, be creative, so that the economy benefits. But they don't really want critical people. The clear example here being China. China is absolutely a model of problem solving, a model of creative thinking, but not necessarily a model of critical thinking. Yes, I have to press it again. Therefore, it's good that if we talk about critical thinking, that we kind of like have an idea of what we're talking about. One thing is creative thinking, something else is critical thinking. And this is nicely represented in this picture. Creative thinking generates knowledge, generates processes, whereas critical thinking will judge the quality of that knowledge, will judge the quality, the validity, and so forth of those processes. They are different. So if we are writing like learning objectives, we should have a clear idea of what we want. Do we want our students to be creative? Do we want them to be critical? I refer you to this video, which is very interesting about being critical thinkers. The main idea is that, sorry, creative. The main idea is that creative thinking happens in the most unlikely places. And I mean, he gives the example. Somebody may even be sitting in the toilet, and then is when the ideas come. Or somebody goes to bed, and before falling asleep, that's when the ideas come. And even in my case, in my dreams, sometimes I have a dream and I wake up, I have to run to my desk and write it down because the ideas came to me in my dream. So they are different. Creative thinking may be spontaneous, it just happens, like the Eureka or Eureka expression. Critical thinking presupposes discipline, as we will see later. It's not just, we cannot just go and sit in the toilet and think that we will be critical. And also when we do this, it's good to define things correctly. Here is an example from the AM workforce of the future, the additive manufacturing, additive manufacturing. And you see the definitions that they are giving, or the descriptions that they are giving of those titles do not really match. For example, they say critical thinking and analytical decision making, and then they say, so the workforce can push the boundaries. Well, pushing the boundaries is not necessarily critical. It's not necessarily analytical. It's necessary, but it's not quite the same. Mental elasticity is so that the workforce can consider all the necessary variables, yes, but it's that elasticity that will push the boundaries. So it's almost like both descriptions should be under mental elasticity rather than under critical thinking. So what does critical thinking entail? Well, it's all about connections. And as Ms. Shofa will know, because we are teaching this course together, it's all about the brain making connections. And those connections being effective, being efficient, being beneficial, or not being that. Therefore, I mean, critical thinking can refer to reasoning, it can refer to decision making, it can refer to a specialized area. And you can see that in the literature. Some people link critical thinking straight with decision making. They say you think critically if your decisions are reasonable and reasoned and well motivated. But you can say, okay, reasoning is implied, decision making is implied, and specialized areas. It can be something individual, or it can be something social. But critical thinking is it also presupposes a context. For example, if we see critical thinking as having to do mostly with reasoning, and we look at the individual, it will be jeopardized, it will be hindered, hampered by lack of access to data. If we are in a situation where there is no freedom to access certain data, our reason cannot be fully critical. If the access to the data is not because we are not free, but because we are poor, think about now, online learning, but people don't have digital libraries. And they cannot access the libraries because they're at home. Lack of technology. a lot of information is there, but if you cannot access it, if you don't have a good Wi-Fi connection, if you don't have a good laptop, and so forth. Knowledge of procedures, attitudes, and so forth. So those things can actually impair critical thinking at the individual level. Now, but there are also social conditions. If we live in a culture of opaqueness, little transparency, how can we actually be effectively critical, efficiently critical, when we don't know what's what? What we see is not what it is. Like in a culture of fakeness, look at the US right now with Trump and fake news and real news, facts and fiction. When facts and fiction are all mixed up and people don't really believe in any anymore, how can one be critical? Another phenomenon is overload. There is an overload of information. So how can one be critical? Our brain cannot even take in the information. There can be too little information. There can be too much information. Chauvinism, politeness, unity as sameness, and so forth. All these things have an impact on critical thinking. And as decision making, the same. Just think about if you say, okay, let's say critical thinking is the tree, a good decision is the fruit. When we go and buy something because we think that that is the best, and we think that our judgment is based on having considered the available alternatives, but how about if we are just choosing that because of advertising, fakeness, social influences? We think that we are basing it on reasons, but the reasons are not that robust, not that solid. We think that we are making the choice, but we are not really making the choice because we have been pre-programmed to make the choice. We have been primed practically to make the choice. So the aim of this is just to indicate that critical thinking is very complex and is not like playing football, that you can learn how to play football even if you're very poor, as long as you have a football ground and you have a ball and you try and learn. It's not an empty skill. It's not an empty skill. So what is it? There are several definitions. Here are some of them. Critical thinking, according to the NC State University, is the thinking, is the active, persistent, and careful consideration of a belief or form of knowledge, the grounds that support it, and the conclusions that follow. It involves analyzing and evaluating one's own thinking and that of others. Hence, it's very complex. In critical thinking, there is plenty of consideration, not only of the beliefs or knowledge that we may have, but also of the data and also how the data were actually acquired. And here are more, just to show you that critical thinking is a complex, is a broad issue that concerns evidence, context, conceptualizations, methods, criteria, and it leads to judgment, and more so. But one of the things that is clear is that thinking is skilled work. As I said before, even football is a skill that comes from practice. Thinking is likewise. It is not true that we are naturally endowed with the ability to think clearly and logically. And I would say just look at Trump or listen to him speaking. If we were naturally endowed with this, he would be Aristotle talking to us, and he's not. He's completely, his ideas are completely disconnected, contradictory. He will say yes and no at the same time. So without learning how to think critically, without practicing, without diligence, without effort, we cannot be critical thinking, because it's not just nagging, it's not just seeing a problem. It requires a lot of hard work. And another thing. So one is that it is hard work. We cannot just teach our students to be critical thinkers because we gave them a game and for 5 minutes they were critical thinkers. Secondly, nobody is critical everywhere. We are critical in some aspects of our lives, and there is research because there is this question whether we can actually teach critical thought. Can we? And there have been experiments, even in mathematics, whereby the teachers will hone the critical thinking skills of their students, let's say by doing activity 1. And in the end, at the end of the week, you can say, mashallah, they're critical. Then when they come back next week, they have activity 2, and they do not carry over any of the critical thinking that was used there. And for example, I have a case, I remember when I was a student in Belgium in the university, I used to go to the students' mosque. And one of my friends was a DNA biologist, and he was doing his PhD, and he was, of course, absolutely very critical, very good student in DNA. But then I observed when he goes to the mosque, he would be very careful not to enter the mosque with his left foot. So for me, you see, as I thought, fancy that. Here you have a very split brain. In university, in the lab, he's absolutely critical. When he comes to the mosque, he's just the same as any farmer who has never been to school and cannot distinguish between magic and science and religion. And that's why I use here in this slide, not even Einstein is Einstein or was Einstein like all day long. And the funny thing is that in this sentence, the word Einstein has changed. In the meaning of the word has changed, because in the first part of the sentence, Einstein is a historical person. In the second, he is a figure. He is a model. He is a type. He is the type of the critical person. So therefore, not even the historical Einstein could never be the figurative, the type. Thirdly, so I said critical thinking requires diligence, requires work, requires means, requires context. Secondly, nobody is critical all the time. We know ourselves, we are quite well educated, we're quite critical, and then when we have to eat, we will eat what is absolutely wrong, and we will be obstinate, and we will be like mules or donkeys that we only eat there. And there is no real reason why we should eat there. It's a completely emotional reason with no rational validity. So not even us, nobody, not even Einstein, as I said, was all the time, Einstein all day long. Thirdly, real critique is a collective endeavor. Why? There's one element would be bias, because we are all biased, and we can counter bias only if what we say or what other people are saying is attacked in a way from all possible angles. Only the collective can actually be really critical systematically in the long run. And we play a part, but it goes beyond us. So, as I said, there are some prerequisites. We should be free to scrutinize. You can see there the hand who's pulling the strings. People are like puppets. They just read what is given to them. Again, China, many things are censored. So even the internet, what they see is not all that there is to be seen, but it's all that they can see. So whatever they critique will be based on what they have. So we need the freedom to scrutinize. And freedom is a key issue now, and especially after France and so. So, I mean, what's the meaning of freedom? How free should we be? Whatever answer we give, if we want to have real science, there should be very few limitations. Then also a community.
I think there is an issue. Maybe they can't hear. Same thing for Hassan.
Hello, can you hear me? Who can't hear me? Because I'm told that not everybody can hear.
Doctor, we can hear you, but there is always a hushing sound, like accompanying your sound, your voice, I mean.
Yeah, exactly.
I wonder whether it's because they said there is like an...
As if on your side you are touching paper or touching something?
No, I'm sitting back and just looking out of the window and talking. Okay, how about now? Because Shofa is in the same office, we were working together. How about now?
Now it's better.
It's better.
Now it's better? Ah, okay,
Now,
thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for telling me. Okay, back here. So as you can see, and also there is an ethical focus, and you need courage to be critical. The fact that so many people who are critical have been killed shows that it takes courage as well. So how can we, the question is, how can we integrate critical thinking as a goal in the curriculum? First is we have to cooperate with our brain. As that's the message in one of our subjects as well, with Meshofa. We have to learn to work with the brain, not against the brain. And thinking is the process, intelligence is the product. It's not that we are intelligent and then we think well. No, we will become intelligent by thinking. And we have to understand this. It's the thinking that builds up intelligence. When we look at our students in the class, it's not that they will think well because they are already intelligent. No, that's something they're going to become. And one of the rules in neuroscience is use it or lose it. And this applies to the brain as well. The connections that the brain makes can be lost if they are not used. Also, we shouldn't have illusions about ourselves. We function exceptionally without seemingly being so exceptional. So people who study the brain will say that the human brain has its particularities, of course, things that are proper to us, peculiar to us, but it is not the brain in itself that makes us special. There are other animals with bigger brains. A monkey, certain monkeys are more, in a way, more intelligent than children up to the age of 2. After 2, then the child surpasses the monkey and the monkey will never catch up. But what is extraordinary about us is the combination and the enhancement of the properties that are there and that are found in other primates, for example, even in some birds. So what is so special about us? For example, a theory of mind that we know that is us thinking even about us, imitation, language. And so they are not all the time absolutely unique properties, but we use them in unique ways. And much of it has to do with problem solving and mental flexibility. Like, let me see, like a sentence that I read about 10 days back. Any monkey, any ape can reach for a banana, including us next to the monkeys. But no monkey has ever reached for the stars. We have been to the moon, not us, but I mean, some of us have been to the moon. Some of us are ready to go to Mars. So that is mental flexibility. And all these things are interconnected. Critical thinking, creative thinking, problem solving, mental flexibility, and they are different, but they go hand in hand. Problem solving, for example, is goal-oriented. Problem solving is a response. It's very much ad hoc. It's a survival element. There is a problem. that causes some sort of restlessness or an obstacle in our way, and therefore we want to solve it. To do that, we will need knowledge and we will need analytic skills. As I said before, being critical is not necessarily being a problem solver, but it's very difficult. It's more difficult to be a problem solver if we are not relatively critical. Mental flexibility is different. Mental flexibility, as I said, it reaches for the stars. It goes beyond the environment. It's not ad hoc. It's in response to what does not exist yet. It's all about imagine. Like, say, for example, if I could use the Quran as a way, kind of like, on the one hand, you have Iqra, which means that the text is there. So that's more like problem solving in the sense. You have to discover what is in front of you. But on the other hand, the element in the Quran, for example, of reflect, al-aql, everything that has to do with al-aql, reflect, goes beyond what is there. When we reflect, we make context, we place things within context, we frame things within frames that are not even there. And so an education that wants critical thinking, and more than that, should pay attention to these things, which are, of course, they come from studying the brain as well. As I said, we have to work with the brain. We need knowledge, we need analytic skills, we need imagination. That would be one of the most important words in school and in college. Imagine. What if? What if? What if? What if? What if? Imagine. And I think this is missing to a large extent in much of our education, the imagination. And if I may say something about Omani culture, there is almost, you see, things are being confused sometimes. Like, say you have the word like bid'ah, and then they think that innovation, which is has to do only with the dogmatic aspect of religion, it becomes a culture that mistrusts innovation. And on the other hand, most of my Omani friends have problems with the word khayali. Khayali is only negative. It's imagination. You don't need it. It's not real. But without the imagination, the real would still be the cave. We would be living in a cave. So if we look around, the countries that have made progress are the countries that have enhanced imagination, who want to do what is not there yet. And of course, intuition. And in this, I think our students are absolutely gifted. I have never seen students that are so intuitive as my Omani students. And we have a clear example. If I've taught IELTS for some time, and my students will give me the right answers to the reading part, the right answers. And then I will say, okay, Ali, why did you choose A and not B? And the response will be wrong. So they somehow intuitively find the right answers, but all the reasons, or a lot of the reasons that they have, so-called, for the answers are absolutely wrong. They come to the right conclusion based on the wrong premises. This is a very intuitive approach. So this element is good, but there are other parts that are not there. Okay, some more. I said before, if we want to teach people to think critically, we have to help them think. To think means to use the brain. To use the brain means to collaborate with the brain. So before we come to a course in critical thinking, it's like there are the prolegomena, the preliminaries about thinking. One strategy is multimodal processing. The brain needs to, so if the idea is if the data reaches the brain through different channels, it will be richer. The brain will have a lot more to go by. So if we want a critical thinking program, let's have a program that favors multimodal processing. Learning from multiple expressions. Why? Because it's making the brain be more agile. For example, if we give a text and a video and a diagram and a picture, and the students know that this is school, this is college, so there must be a link between all those things. So when the student seeks, when the brain of the student searches for the link between the video, the text, the diagram, and the picture, which means when it's searching for the link in multiple representations, the brain is actually exercising. And that can only be helpful. Cognitive load. If we want our students to think, we cannot overload them. So it's between 5 and 7 new elements each time because the brain cannot remember more than that. Insightful problem solving, not formulaic problem solving. And we know this. When we have grammar tests, our students perform quite well. They leave the test, we ask them to talk or to write, and nothing of that was tested will be okay in the next instance. Why? Because they are fine with formulaic problems. There is a formula and you apply that formula as a robot. But we need insightful problem solving. When the student has to access, when the neurons have to make the right connections in the brain, not when all the things have already been given to them. It's like, there is a difference between saying, okay, you have to bake a cake, you have to make flan. So here is the milk, here are the eggs, here is the sugar, here is the vanilla. We have already given everything to the students. They only have to mix them. But as you must have seen on TV, there are other programs when they say, okay, look, here you have 2 potatoes, one onion, 3 carrots, some chicken, and 5 strawberries. Put up a menu. And then every person taking part in that program will come up with a different menu. That is a kind of insightful problem solving. Implicit and explicit knowledge learning. So in an educational setting, most things will be somehow explicit for the teacher, but not for the student. So we have to work also to prime the brain, to include implicit things that we will not be dealing with right now, but that we will need later on. Metacognitive and regulative skills, social cognition, social learning, and we know that's important, and even the inclusion of affective variables. Why? Because the perspective nowadays is that the effects of educational methods are often not determined by the methods, but by the way that the students perceive the methods. All this is like the preliminary aspects of critical thinking. All these things have to do with thinking. So that was my part there. So how do we prepare a curriculum for critical thinking? We start by preparing a curriculum that favors thinking. And that thinking can be critical, can be creative, can be problem solving and so forth, but that has to prepare that. And then how do you prepare a curriculum for critical thinking? Well, we have to get the content, which is appropriate to teach critical thinking. So for example, we will give the main theories, the main acceptable or accepted theories, but also the alternative theories. The main approaches, the alternative approaches, models, and then data, that's the data, and the tools and the models at the level of content. And we will focus that we must be critical about the data. And this is most important now because our students find their data online. Even as when we search for data, we will also look for data online. But how about the data? Are we critical about it? Secondly, we have to make our students, help our students become critical about the interpretive framework. That's why I chose this picture. You see, he's explaining A, B, C, D, blah, blah. What is the link? The guy says, then a miracle occurs. This is not to mock miracles, but it is to mock the fact that sometimes we just accept that the interpretive framework is fine because somebody gave it to us. Critical thinkers will also deal with this. Then another element, which is critical, all these elements that should be in a curriculum, in the content of a curriculum for critical thinking. Cognitive, wait, hang on a sec, somebody's microphone is on. Okay, there you are. So we're also critical about bias. Like here, other than the booing, I think they liked our presentation. Of course, it's bias, other than the booing. Critical about obvious agreements. This is particularly important in the human sciences because we deal with texts and we think that because we might think, no, we don't, I mean, we might think that people are saying the same because they're using the same words, which is, of course, not the case, not always the case. Like here, excuse me, which tar are you actually talking about? Everybody's thinking, everybody said tower. One might think, we're talking about the same thing. They are not talking about the same thing. And critical also about our grandiose illusions. We are just small pieces in a huge puzzle. I said, I believe the collective is what will be critical. The individual is just, we can make small contributions in small parts of our work and our lives. And just to sum up those things, what to be critical about: ideas, words, facts, theoretical framework, biases, contextual framing and biases, purpose at hand, the thinking operations, conclusions, all those things. The critical thinker will look at all those things and assess how warranted, how appropriate they are. And this shows you, again, that nobody can be 100% critical because nobody can be absolutely critical in a Descartesian sense. Like Descartes, he said, I will start from zero. What is the only idea that I cannot doubt? Cogito ergo sum. That if I'm thinking, it's because I exist. We cannot go back. We will never do that. We will never go back to zero. Many aspects of what we say, many aspects of what we think is absolutely proven, robust, solid, firm, is not or may not be. Hence, again, my stress on the collective. The modality, of course, how we do. And in the same way as children learn by seeing, we have to model that. So if we want to help students to be critical thinkers, we have to be ourselves in class. For example, if we follow a textbook and we just follow the textbook, we are just teaching in a kind of religious way. If we follow a textbook and then we tell the student, but I do not quite agree with the statement of the author because of another book. And yes, but I also don't quite agree because there was another study somewhere else. This is critical thinking in action. If I just take a textbook that we follow blindly, this is not critical thinking. And since there is no reference to other aspects, other parts of research and so forth, it will be weak as a model. And in the end, transcendence, which means always go beyond, help our students, because as you remember at the beginning, I said some people question whether we can actually teach critical thinking because it doesn't seem to be very transferable, a transferable skill. So we need to help our students continually transcend, go beyond. You can watch House because his way of teaching his trainees is really critical. He doesn't give answers. He throws them the problem and then he teases the solutions out of them. What to do? Many things. I just want and go to the next because it's coming to an end. And assessment. Our assessment itself has to be critical thinking oriented. How we mark the assessment, how we design our assessment, because our marks are very often part of the hidden curriculum. Our marks transmit a message. So for example, if we were to mark like this, and remembering is only 15%, this would also mean that that's how we teach as well, because we cannot go and create an exam that is completely unrelated to how we teach. So if during the semester we just teach for the memory, and then we only give 15% for the memory, that's completely unfair. But this reveals a complete whole understanding of the curriculum, whereby the memory part is 15%. The understanding part is 20%, that's 35%. It's good, but it's not enough to really pass. You need more. And then la crème de la crème, the best of the best, the top 40% or 20%, or that should be visible, because it's part of the hidden curriculum. It's hidden, but as you know, a lot of things that are subconscious and unconscious are hidden to consciousness, but not hidden to the brain. They play a huge role. The next step, and as a conclusion, of course, if thinking critically requires hard work, requires diligence, training, is done together, it cannot be done only in one sector and area. Therefore, it should be across the curriculum. The different parts of the curriculum should lead to the same, should contribute to the development of the same kind of environment that cherishes critical thinking and the practice thereof. In the natural sciences, in philosophy, in humanity, in the social sciences. And eventually we come to the sector of human life that is action. Human life is not just about truth, it's about choices. And choices have to do with actions. We are essentially beings that act. Inaction is an illusion. Nobody cannot do something. We're always doing something. We're always saying something. Even silence speaks, inaction speaks. For example, if somebody is going to be killed in front of my eyes and I don't do anything, I cannot say, oh, I did not do anything. Yes, I did something. I did not defend the person. Just by using the words, I did not do anything, I am hiding my actual doing, which was neglect to act and defend somebody. Therefore, the critical thinking and the critical thinking skills, if we want the tree to have flowers, to bloom and have fruit, bear fruits, then it will come to action. And we can ask ourselves, okay, where is the action in our school? Where are the actions that transcend our school? For example, if we have a lesson about the environment, and then what? If we have a lesson about social justice, and then what? If we have a lesson about the perfect school, and then what? Did we come on the weekend to paint our classrooms, to put plants in the garden so that the school looks beautiful? No. That's a tree without flowers, without fruits. And critical thinking is not just about truth, because life is not only about truth. Life is about action, mostly. And very shortly, I will not go into this because this is a lot more. As I said, if part of the content has to do with bias and part of the content has to do with the procedure of thinking. So cognitive bias is something that really impairs our thinking and makes it not critical. We can deal with this, a course like this, at the outset of, for example, the semester, or in the middle or at the end. I will not go into this. I want to give you the examples. So the form of thinking will be logic. We could include logic through a course or embedded in courses, so that students can actually see the how of the thought, whether the problem with the thought was in the how. For example, if A, then B, there is A, therefore there's B. And that's all logic. And that can be a very useful part of teaching, of enhancing critical thinking. But also a very, very important part is being aware of cognitive biases, which are systemic errors in thinking that occur when people are processing and interpreting information. Here, I'll give you some examples. These are lots of biases. For example, the first one, where do anchoring or focalism, anchoring biases. We may be biased by the first course we took when we learned certain key concepts, and then anything that came afterwards, we said, okay, this is new, it's interesting, but the old one still works. So this is a bias that can happen to people that think that they are thinking critically. It can happen to anybody, to us, to anybody. So this means that part of teaching critical thinking will have to deal with cognitive bias, things that from inside are weakening our thoughts. Anthropocentric thinking, authority bias, kind of, because Aristotle said this, or Plato said that. Yes, so what? It may be correct, it may be. It's the old Magister Dixit thing. The teacher said it. Conservatism bias is very hard to put in doubt our beliefs. We will tend to stay but what we believe, especially if the question affects our self-idea, self-concept, identity, because our identity is mostly based on beliefs. We are not just biological beings. We are stories. We are characters with these stories, and therefore we believe in these stories, and that's what we say we are. So it's very hard to suddenly leave the world of our story and accept that it was a story, one of many, and other stories may be just as likely. So that's a bias. Continued influence effect, courtesy, bias, there are lots of biases. That's why I said that we'll be looking into the nitty-gritty of how to stitch together a curriculum in critical thinking, be it separate or embedded. That's a different question. So, if I may come to some conclusions at the end. First, there will be no trust in truth without critical thinking. If nobody is critical about the truth, then how do we know that those things are true? In general, if we are afraid of questioning certain things, it may not be because we believe in them, it may be because we want to believe in them, but we are not so sure that they are actually worth believing in them. So therefore, without having a culture of critical thinking, it's very hard to talk about truth. Secondly, there can be no change or development without critical thinking. Because without critical thinking, we accept what's in front of us. We accept what is given to us. We accept what the teacher tells us. Therefore, there can be no real change, only a repetition of the same. Thirdly, critical thinking cannot be absent from a sanctioned, implemented, and hidden curricula. And that is an issue. We have to look at the hidden curriculum and see how much room it allows for critical thinking. Fourthly, critical thinking entails discipline, collective engagement. It entails sitting down, analyzing the data, analyzing the processes, analyzing the approaches, analyzing the frameworks. It takes time. It takes time. That's why, for example, to have a PhD means kind of like, okay, on one issue, you were really critical and it took you 4 years at least. It takes time. Fifthly, we must accept that we cannot control critical thinking. If we can control critical thinking, it's not critical anymore. sixthly, or in the sixth place, nobody is a critical thinker. Nobody thinks critically all the time. We are not robots. In a sense, we can have a machine with algorithms and so that is really analyzing everything critically the whole day, but that's not how we live our lives. Usually, the biggest part of the major part of our time, we are not that critical. We are just passively critical. And there is more life to life than critical thinking. Otherwise, we will kill ourselves. So, okay, that is basically what I wanted to share. In short, we need to be very clear how we understand critical thinking. We need to be very clear what endangers or hampers or hinders critical thinking. And we have also, I think, to be clear that it has to be a collective. It happens within that's why the sciences evolve so much, because the scientific environment is an environment based on critical thinking, where people learn a lot more from disproving truths than from actually coming with the truth. It is actually the disproving that shows the robustness, the strength of the principles that we can, for the time being, hold on to. Okay, if you have any questions, I will try to answer or say what I think.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sergio.
Yeah, welcome, Doctor.
Yes, go ahead, Dr. Naam.
I just have one comment with regard to this issue. Dr. Sergio, you mentioned it has to be collective, but I believe it has to be united first as an individual effort. But this individual effort cannot survive without the collective tendency that you have mentioned. And this critical thinking seems sometimes selfish, but it has to be. It needs to be selfish on a certain level. I mean, look at every critical thinker. They have to be selfish sometimes in order to survive, in order to give enough energy, so to speak, to their critical thinking. Otherwise, if they don't be selfish enough, they will be lost. Yeah.
Yes, I of course.
We'll lose that in the crowd,
yes.
I mean.
The individual and the collective are practically the two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
And I think your idea of selfish is like, in the sense, you have to commit and believe in what you are doing, and
yes,
commitment.
Commitment is great again. I mean, for example, at the level of our department, this is critical thinking. I believe that every one of us has this component, but how to revive it and how to let it flourish to the extent that we be capable to transform it and implant it in our students. The example that you referred to of how the serial opera that you referred to was really a good example. How himself, he was kind of selfish on a personal part and unselfish in his willingness to transform this characteristic of, to transfer this characteristic of critical thinking to the group of trainees. He used to.
Yes, indeed.
Supervise. Yeah.
I've got one question for you, Sergio, Dr. Moza, if you don't mind. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, of course. Yes, I can hear you. Of course, Dr. Holly. Go ahead.
Yeah. Very much for your thought-provoking session. Just my question. Yeah. the question that always triggers my mind. So how would I know that I'm a critical thinker? Because some people that like associate critical thinking with being controversial. Controversy, because if you are controversial and you question everything, and people sometimes assume that you are a critical thinker. So sometimes also they associate critical thinking with problem solving. If you are able to fix a problem or problems, you are likely to be critical thinker. So critical thinking as a word itself, it's not really well defined. It's a bit like, as you said, it's a buzzword. So what do you say here?
I think maybe the attitude is important. What I said before, it's not just asking questions for asking questions. That may be part of it. That may be the start of it in some cases. Maybe for the students, maybe they need that kind of shock effect that somebody will question something. But that's only the start of the journey, actually, because triggering a question doesn't mean that it means that actually you should now follow it through. But I do think it's about asking about the data, about the sources, about in the whole of life, But in the academic world, is not just reacting with a question. It's part of it. I agree. It's part of it. If we do not ask questions, the questions will not arise, will not present themselves. But then, for instance, I mean, let's say anything. If you say A, imagine you say A, and I say, why not B? And then that's it. It's like we are just in a coffee shop drinking coffee and cake, or two people are drinking a beer with some chips, and they're just having an argument that will lead nowhere and make nobody wiser, and nobody will know. So that's why I'm in favor of a collective academic kind of culture that is critical, where questions are raised, because if they are not raised, they will not come. They will not come about. We would still be living in the caves and thinking, I don't know, that people are autistic because the spirit got into them and not because the brain is working differently. But that's the start of the journey. After that comes the hard work of studying the different possibilities. And there is work. Yes.
Yeah, do you think is this something contagious? Because that means, yeah, does uncritical teacher, of course, make like a critical student? So that's the issue, because teachers always ask students to be critical, and students also are not really sure whether the teacher himself or herself is really critical. So that's the issue. Is it something contagious? Or
I think yes. I think your question is very, very important. I'm still busy with it because it's a question that many people are asking, whether critical thinking can actually be taught. Because they say, if it cannot be taught, let's stop all this talk. Let's stop all that money that is going into projects for critical thinking, because it's all wasted. Therefore, if somebody who is not critical will never be critical, but I think one thing is clear. In Christian philosophy, there is a saying, which is in Latin. It goes, "Gratia non dat quod natura non prestat," which means, there is also in Arabic, but I don't remember it in Arabic now. It means grace, or for them is religion. Religion will not give you what nature hasn't given you before. Religion will only activate what you already have in you. And it's the same here. If we have a teacher who is definitely not critical, that teacher will not enhance critical thinking. Maybe it will even hamper critical thinking, because that teacher might feel threatened by students asking questions. And we can see that sometimes when it becomes almost like a little war between the teacher and the student. But I take away with me your question, and it's still my question. that there are people who are really studying whether critical thinking can actually be taught.
Total.
And
Assessed
Oh,
also.
sorry, Dr. Hawi. I think critical thinking is a behavior. After all, it becomes a kind of a behavior. And if a teacher is a critical thinker, they will simply play a role model for their students.
So what I have understood, Dr. Naam, if you are a critical thinker, you need to question your own assumption. You
yes,
question your own thinking. Otherwise,
Certainly.
yeah, because everyone thinks, but thinking, critical thinking goes beyond our thinking, where you question your own assumptions about certain things. That's what I know about
yes,
thinking.
yes,
Yes.
Normal thinking that everybody thinks, and that's the issue. How would you push like the bar or the boundaries of the students' thinking in order to reach that particular like boundaries? Yeah.
Yani I believe other than the activities that you take on daily basis in classroom, yourself being a role model to your student plays the greatest part in this respect. Your own behavior, criticizing your own decisions, your own assumptions, and questioning them all the way, and accepting other results. For example, something you have always believed in, you have always practiced in one manner or another, and then you just change, you accept the change and you justify that change. You are not ashamed at all of admitting that you have arrived at different findings recently.
yes. I think that's why I also said, look, critical thinking is very important. Nobody is critical everywhere, because we might not be critical in criticism itself. Why I am reacting to something with questions may just be a symptom of something in me. It might be a cognitive bias on my side. But I think in the long run, when we do not shrug away, when we do not shy away from making room for a critical culture, and in college, of course, in college, it has to turn into well argumented positions. It's not just, I mean, to say, oh, I don't like what you're saying. That's not being critical. That's just being childish. So
Yes.
so that's the thing. This culture whereby, yes, it all starts with the question. It all starts with the assumption that I may be wrong, or you may be wrong, or what we think is true is just half true. And then the journey starts.
Dr. Sergio,
Yes.
there is
Yes,
a critical question. There is a critical question raised here by Mr. Sultan in the chat. He raised a question which is should we open judgment about metaphysical truth that we find hard to grasp, or should we reject them, as many people nowadays who claim they are critical thinkers? What do you
Yes.
think, Sergio? Dr. Tuli, if you don't mind, can you just mute your mic?
I think, yeah, I think very often, I mean, part of the being critical is just we will have to agree to disagree and gather information and evidence, because if something is metaphysical, yeah, it may or it may not be accurate. And proving or disproving is not like proving or disproving whether something has too much sugar or too much salt for somebody who has kidney problems or problems with their insulin. So yes, especially nowadays with metaphysical questions like religious questions, yes, it's a big issue. But we have to, I think that the question should be allowed. The questions are asked. And then many things will depend on the context. Many things will depend on the context. For example, now we are seeing all these things with the cartoons in France. Kind of like, okay, that fact is a local fact. Within France, the French culture and the French political system. And the way somebody processes it in France may not be the same way that somebody processes that in, say, I don't know, Pakistan or Oman. Um, um, so that's another part that kind of like I hinted at before. When we want to be critical, there are many things that hinder being critical and honestly critical, and very often they are contextual. And also the example of the tower has to do with that. When somebody in France says A, it doesn't mean that that A is also A in China. And being critical would imply that when I am dealing with those situations, I can comprehend, or not comprehend, I will not comprehend, but I will kind of like understand that a French A may be a Chinese D. And that is also part of being critical in thinking. To think that things that are said or done are the same everywhere, that's not being critical. That may be true for gravity. The law of gravity applies everywhere, but in the world of culture, in the world of language, it's not like that.
It's very interesting to provoke thinking, Dr. Sergio. Yeah, but you know, I totally agree with you when it comes to that, to what you say, that critical thinking is a skill and it should be actually embedded in all our courses from the beginning to the graduation, so we can build up, we can help the students to acquire such a skill. Because when you just heard a third year student who is about to graduate and saying, should we memorize words, or or do you ask us to critically analyze such a thing? So that means that they have not reached, you know, what's Bloom actually supported, which going through them the understanding to the evaluation.
Exactly. Yeah.
So as if we are, I felt as if we are did nothing, you know. So totally agree with you. It's a skill, but at the same time, we are not saying critical in a way that we I don't know how to say, because the students, they are afraid of the word critical. They think about it from a different perspective, and they associate it with those that if he or she is critical, that means he is very intelligent and he is, you know, and he the one who knows everything. It's not. I mean, I feel it's just critical in a way of looking at things analytically. You analyze that subject. You analyze content in a way.
I think sometimes if we present critical as being intelligent, then it might be offensive, or it might lead to a sense of arrogance. For me, it's all about the connections that the brain makes. What we want to know is that the brain is making the best, most effective, most efficient, most reliable, most valid connections. And for me, it's about, yes, of course, that too. But I mean, a critical person will know that, as somebody was saying, Dr. Hawley, I think, about our own assumptions. For example, imagine I am in a context where most things upset me at the end of the day. So what connections, what conclusions am I going to draw? Sometimes the conclusion that I must draw is, this is not my place. I have to look for another place. So even in metaphysics, sometimes we will come to that conclusion. Based on my premises, I come to these conclusions. The other person is starting on a different set of premises, and he or she comes to different conclusions. And the question why I start on these premises and he or she starts on those other premises, that might not be a case where we can, it's not like gravity. It may have to do with being more optimistic. For example, let's say there is God or there is no God. Maybe the evidence, I can study the evidence, my friend can study the evidence, and at the end of the day, I said, yes, I acknowledge your arguments. He acknowledges my arguments, but at the end of the day, I said, well, but my feeling is like, there is something out there. And the other person might say, but my feelings is that there is nothing out there. And we have to kind of like accept that we will not go any further than that. We just have to create a context whereby we can remain friends, knowing that they will take that position and I will take this position. But being critical is also that commitment to actually assessing, as Dr. Hawley was saying, and also Dr. Naham, and the courage, as Dr. Noam says, the courage to assess, to analyze one's own position. It doesn't mean that we will agree. I think by being critical, we know that we will not agree all the time. But that's not a problem. We don't have to agree all the time.
Yeah, fair enough. I think we need to stop here, guys, because after 30 minutes, we're going to have another workshop, which is offered, I think, by Oxford University, as Dr. Hawley sent us the email earlier in the morning. So thank you very much on the behalf of all the staff who attended today. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Sergio, for this intellectual, critical, way of the presentation of how to approach critical thinking. We really appreciate it.
I am glad. Thank you. I'm glad to have shared this with you. Have a nice day, all of you, inshallah.
Same to you, everybody. Thank you very much, Dr. Sergio.
Bye. Bye.
Thinker has to be also a researcher all the way.
Yes.
Commitment to find the truth, wherever it be.
Indeed, whatever it may be, even not knowing.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Bye-bye, people. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.